Welcome to the Call to Freedom here on LRN.FM. It is Wednesday, May the 1st. I really wanted to call it Monday. It is Wednesday, May the 1st, 2019. As always, we're broadcasting live from the Liberty Radio studio here in Keene, New Hampshire. I am your host, Aria author of Dancing in Hellfire, which you can find on Amazon. And joined, as always, by
Michael Hampton from BitcoinHistory.com. And yeah, I went through all of yesterday thinking it was Sunday, and I was just so completely disoriented. I kept having to remind myself it was Tuesday, and today I'm like, oh, it's Monday again.
Yeah, I'm very disoriented because I did, of course, take yesterday just completely off, and I had 2 great days off from my other job. In fact, I spent both of them with Thunderbuns. It was great. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, you did the whole pyromaniac thing.
Well, yeah, I've got to. There's a lot of wood there to burn, and there's still a ton there to burn. We're going to do it again Monday, which, raises problems. Spending time with him is something I have to set aside time for. I mean, right. I really do. And I don't have a lot of time to set aside. It's ultimately going to be either a Monday or a Tuesday. And, of course, Monday, I'm on Free Talk Live. Tuesday, I have Aria Uncensored. Both of those sort of impede me from doing other things. And, of course, there's Call to Freedom on both of those days.
Right.
Something has to go. Something has to be dropped. Ideally, I could get my Free Talk Live spot moved to Tuesday or something like that. I haven't talked to Ian and Mark about this. But that's what would be ideal. And then Monday, we could either just not do the show, or we could get Will to remote in to host it. Ideally, that would be what would happen, because I wouldn't want the show to become 4 days a week. But that may be ultimately what has to happen, because that was my first full day off in more than a month. And it was great. Every time I take a full day off, that's my response. Oh, my God, I have to do this more often. and I really do. Because even now, I'm tired. I'm so tired. Because it was only one day off. And, of course, I was still up until 4 o'clock in the morning, actually watching Iron Man and Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2 is terrible. Why would anybody recommend that to me? It's exactly the same as the first one. Oh, we have this suit. Uh-oh, somebody else has a suit. Let's fight and go bam, bam, whoosh, whoosh for 45 minutes. End of movie.
That sounds so exciting.
Yeah. So the first Iron Man was really good. I was glad to have that conversation with Mark Monday night, where he recommended it to me because, the arc of the movies plays out like comic books, which is really cool. And I thought it would be really awesome. And the first one was. But after that, so far, I'm not impressed. Obviously, they're going to be moving on to other superheroes. There's a list of 20-something movies. I'm intending to watch them in order, not necessarily the order that they were made, because the Captain America movies were actually recommended to be watched first, and I don't really have any interest in watching those. For the first reason, I've heard that they're not good. For the second reason, he's Captain freaking America. I'm not a big fan of America.
Who is?
And, he is this sort of ultra-patriotic response to Superman, which is what Superman initially was. As the American ego grew out of control, so did Superman's powers. I mean, initially, he wasn't really capable of flight. Now he is. Then he just became sort of omnipotent, this sort of super god there on the earth that was weak against only one specific thing that was extremely rare. So that was what happened with Superman. And, of course, the guy who created them, whose name I don't remember, actually remarked about this himself during the 50s, about how Superman was largely a propaganda response to the American ego in an attempt to bolster it. And he sort of became a symbol of America's view on itself. And
we can do anything.
Yeah, and so I've never been a big fan of Superman. Nor Batman. The Batman movies were pretty good, I thought. Well, not the third one with Bane in it. That was really weak. That was a terrible ending to that trilogy. But they were otherwise pretty good. And Batman and Iron Man are very similar because, they're both these ultra-rich, we're going to use technology and money and our brains to turn ourselves into superheroes kind of things, which is really cool. Except Batman, for some reason, is full of teenage angst as a grown man. And,
what's going on there?
He's just angsty, dark and brooding, I guess. And Iron Man, of course, is not. He's actually rather interesting as far as a person goes. I firmly believe that Robert Downey Jr. based his entire model of Tony Stark off of John McAfee. He even kind of looks like him during the Iron Man movies. And that's the sort of behavior that John McAfee got up to. Oh, I'm going to take this money and go to this country and bang a bunch of hookers and do a lot of drugs. And that was more or less what Tony Stark did. So I think he did look at John McAfee like, this is if there was going to be an Iron Man in the United States, that's probably who it would be. Not saying anything about John McAfee's character or anything like that. So that's what I've been up to. And of course, today I returned to work, and I'm dreading that because we're going to be very busy.
Yeah, well.
But hey, it means I get to, see Thunderbuns again, so it's all good. Anyway, in the news is that, see, I'm not the only one. Kicks for Guns agrees that it does appear that Robert Downey Jr. based his Tony Stark off of John McAfee. Interesting. I'm glad other people noticed that as well.
I've never heard that one before.
Well, I imagine it's probably a really niche belief because you have to, A, know who John McAfee is. And a lot of people are aware of his name, but they don't know much about him as a person.
Right. They don't know that he... Well, I don't know much about... I mean, I hear what he's been up to lately, but not how he got there.
Well, the best characterization of John McAfee is going to be found in his video on YouTube, How to Uninstall McAfee Antivirus.
Now, he's the guy responsible for McAfee antivirus, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The video does not help you uninstall it.
Okay. What does the video do?
The video is him doing a bunch of drugs with a bunch of hot chicks and ending up with white powder all over his face. It's basically a screw you. I made this software. I cashed out. Now it's your problem, not mine video. And it is like the top result on YouTube when people Google how to uninstall McAfee antivirus.
I guess he probably succeeded in uninstalling McAfee that way.
Well, I'm sure that John McAfee did. I mean, he uninstalled it from his life for the most part, and he still gets, requests from people. So ultimately, he just made a really funny video about it. I'd highly recommend people watch it. It's not exactly safe for work. Although I don't think I would go as far as saying it's unsafe for work. It's just not something I would want to appear as in my search history while at work.
How to uninstall McAfee antivirus? That doesn't seem like it would be... that would get totally overlooked.
Not for a technician who was going through the search history and had actually watched that before. Apparently, other people were saying that Elon Musk is the real Tony Stark, saying that, he's based off of Elon Musk or whatever. It would be sort of appropriate in that Elon Musk is a welfare whore in the same way that Tony Stark was. One of the really cool things I liked about Iron Man, and I kept wondering if they were going to allude to it, and they kind of sort of did without actually getting into it. But the entire thing started because Stark's company was double dealing. They were selling weapons both to the U.S. military and to the terrorists that they were fighting. And that to me, it was prime territory to challenge U.S. foreign policy, because it's not just private companies here in the United States to do that. It's the military itself. The military itself will sell weapons to terrorists.
Yeah.
We have fully loaded the terrorists in Syria, or ISIS in Syria is how I would like to characterize them, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, all of those using ultimately American arms or Soviet arms, but usually American arms. And of course, he got fed up with that, so he's like, okay, well, we're not doing weapons anymore, which I thought was a really cool perspective, but they never actually got into the fact that there was some jingoism in it, which is this idea that, America has to protect world peace and all of this other stuff.
No.
That they didn't actually get into. And this is the call to freedom. Welcome back. This is the Call to Freedom here on LRN.FM. And interesting stuff is going on currently in Venezuela. And we've talked about Venezuela extensively here on the show, but it's an ongoing story, right? So there's constantly new stuff happening.
Yeah, there's military occupation and people getting killed and all kinds of stuff.
Well, that's the most recent thing to happen, is that obviously Venezuela in 2012 essentially banned guns to the civilian population by using the excuse of common sense gun control. Mm-hmm. And of course, this past week used tanks to run over said civilians who were protesting the starvation and mass poverty and things like that. But apparently, and as we expected, liberals have now come out saying it was never real socialism.
Of course not.
No, of course not. Even though, Bernie Sanders and others, even during his, I think it was 2012 presidential campaign, Sanders had on his website an article exonerating Venezuela and calling it an ideal model and things like that.
Just today, I saw a Salon article back from 2013 about Hugo Chavez's unique brand of socialism. What?
Well, to be fair, Chavez's may have been more or less okay. It seems to have sort of fallen apart under the care of Maduro. I don't know because I wasn't there, but I think that Chavez was probably a strong enough leader, well enough liked by the Venezuelan people, that they were able to keep it together.
Well, the problem is the
money
for the
most part. Could be that the money ran out. I don't know. I wasn't there. So other people who have lived under socialism have fled it, which is not surprising. I've never heard of anyone fleeing the horrors of the free market and liberty. But people do flee the horrors of socialism relatively often. And of course, there's people like Garry Kasparov who have lived under socialism. He lived under the Soviet Union, in fact. And all of these popular figures, they all say the same thing, that socialism is bad. Whatever it is that you imagine in your head, and that's the problem, is part of the inability to recognize that words and labels don't actually represent the things that we think they represent. So when they talk about socialism, they're not talking about anything in the real world. They're talking about this imaginary vision they have in their heads that could somehow be implemented with minimal suffering and hardship. And I agree that in theory, any of that is possible. In theory, we could all lounge around on beaches all day being served by robots and advanced AI and things like that, while all of the work is handled by 50 or 60 people who use technology to do the work of 10,000. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying that it's not likely. It's not any more likely that we're going to achieve the socialist paradise than it is that we are going to achieve a libertarian paradise. So we have a new example of a migrant from Venezuela who has come to the United States and written an article for the USA Today saying that Venezuela was my home and socialism destroyed it. Slowly, it will destroy America too. While neither Medicare for all nor a wealth tax will turn America into Venezuela overnight, all it would take is a series of catastrophic policies, most of which are already in place, I would point out.
That's true.
So the first time I couldn't buy food at the grocery store, I was 15 years old. It was 2014 in Caracas, and I had spent more than an hour waiting in line. That's never going to happen in the United States. They will bring in people to open more registers if it gets to that point.
Oh, it's not about opening the registers. It's about the food being on the shelf.
Well, actually, it was about the registers and the slow system. It was due it was due to the Venezuelan rationing system and how there was so much paperwork they had to do in order to process people and allow them to buy food.
Mm. Oh, yes.
It wasn't in 2014 an issue of lack of food.
Yeah, let's do that whole paperwork system in the U.S. Let's all buy food the way we buy health care.
Yeah, let's absolutely not. So he noticed that he had forgotten his ID. Without the ID, the government rationing system would not let the supermarket sell his family the full quota of food that they needed. It was 4 days until the government allowed them to buy more. I mean, I can't even imagine who in their right mind would want a system where you're simply not allowed to go to the grocery store to buy food. That is absolutely ridiculous, and that is socialism, with the means of production controlled by the state. And I realize there are some people who disagree with that definition of socialism because they think the means of production has to be owned by the people themselves directly. I would point out to those people that what they're describing is communism, which is inherently anarchistic, while socialism is inherently statist. And you can find this in the Communist Manifesto written by Karl Marx, where socialism was a middle ground step between the capitalist fascist state, is how I would actually characterize it. But he called it capitalism, so okay, let's go with that. Socialism is the middle ground where the state takes ownership of the means of production, and ultimately even the state is eroded away as the people democratize or whatever and take control of the means of production themselves.
Which now we know that's ridiculous, and even then we knew that was ridiculous. But some people actually still believe it.
In theory, it is possible that all of that would work out exactly the way they're envisioning it. The problem is that human nature being what it is, you end up with people in charge who are like Stalin, who are like Maduro, who seize power, who abuse that power, who believe they can centrally plan everything in people's lives, and who immediately start screwing everything up.
In order for it to work, humans would have to be something other than human.
Well, that's true of libertarianism as well. I mean, we're inherently violent species, right? Violence is not just inherent to our existence; it's required to even survive.
For animals, we have to.
Yeah. So the same argument against socialism would apply against libertarianism. Is that in order for the non-aggression principle to be universally upheld in this libertarian society, we would actually have to stop being humans. So this was fairly normal for me. All my life, I lived under socialism in Venezuela until I left and came to the U.S. as a student in 2016. Because the regime in charge imposed price controls and nationalized the most important private industries, production plummeted. No wonder I had to wait hours in lines to buy simple products such as toothpaste or flour. And the shortages went far beyond the supermarket. My family and I suffer from blackouts and lack of water. The regime nationalized electricity in 2007 in an effort to make electricity, quote-unquote, free. Unsurprisingly, this resulted in underinvestment in the electrical grid. By 2016, my home lost power roughly once a week, which should be a warning against people's belief in socialized medicine. This is going to happen there as well if we allow it to be nationalized or socialized, whatever word people would like to use to characterize the state taking full ownership of the healthcare industry.
We already see it with the NHS, the healthcare system in Canada, the VA in the U.S. They already have examples.
Yeah, but the VA is select. It's absolutely terrible. It's not where anyone would want to get healthcare, except that it doesn't actually cost them anything. This is the call to... Welcome back. This is the Call to Freedom, and we've been talking about Venezuela and socialism and the habit of people to envision this idea of socialism that, rightly or wrongly, in theory, could work. The problem is that all applications of this idea have led to mass human suffering, totalitarianism, oppression, and outright murder of civilian populations. At some point, I think it would be prudent for humanity to say, okay, well, this may be a good idea. And I'm not saying socialism is a good idea. I'm saying it may be. In this theoretical model of socialism that people point to and believe in, it may be a good idea. The problem is that human nature being what it is, there doesn't seem to be any valid pathway of moving from where we are, to there. But before we get back into that, I want to tell you about the Rational Review, which is a news digest located at rationalreview.com. And it's the Freedom Movement's daily news digest, aggregating stories from all over the internet that are of interest to libertarians and liberty-minded people. They include podcasts, videos, blogs, and news articles, and are now a source for people to receive the Call to Freedom's podcasts. So be sure to check them out at rationalreview.com to stay up to date on all the happenings in the wider world. And it's actually from them that I got a lot of these stories about Venezuela, with, of course, their awesome captions and editing and rewriting of headlines, which is really one of the biggest reasons to subscribe to Rational Review News Digest. Like, there's this politician in Texas who wants to forbid people from getting religious services at their death penalty or something like that. I don't remember exactly what he wanted to do, but they characterize him as, an idiot politician. That's what they put in their headline. Idiot politician does this stupid thing, or something to that effect. I don't remember exactly what the stupid thing was, but it was stupid.
Sounds good to me. We all need to be recontextualizing these things to challenge people's assumptions about what the state is and
absolutely
its place in their lives.
It's far more accurate to refer to this person as an idiot, as most politicians are. Someone on DLive has pointed out that without outside interference, socialism could work. I'm not sure I agree, and I'm not sure even other socialists agree. The perspective that socialists seem to take is that the reason that Venezuela is undergoing the collapse that is undergoing is because of trade embargoes. And I don't have it in front of me now. We discussed it a few weeks ago, but the contention seems to be from avowed socialists, from people who describe themselves as socialists, that socialism needs some sort of outside income to sustain itself. And this was especially true in regard to the Soviet Union, which spent massive amounts of money keeping its satellite states going, and then ultimately ran out of money and collapsed itself. That seems to be how things go. Socialism becomes just a sort of black hole for money. So even countries who aren't ideologically opposed and continue trading with them are just pouring money into it and getting no result whatsoever because the production just isn't there and isn't being handled properly and all of that kind of nonsense that comes from statism and nationalizing various things. So it's just a black hole for money, and ultimately the black hole eats too much and collapses upon itself, like black holes tend to do. So the water situation was even worse. And this is from a Venezuelan man who immigrated to the United States in 2016. My family didn't have running water for only about 1 day per month, but as the years passed, we sometimes went several weeks without it. For all of these problems, the regime has blamed an iguana. Hold on.
Iguana?
Time out. Do they really mean an iguana? Right-wing sabotage and even the weather. Apparently, yes, they did indeed blame an outage on an iguana.
They blamed an iguana.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, whatever, man. They're going to make excuses.
Yeah, that's as good an excuse as any, right?
Stephen has pointed out that you can't embargo information, which is why Cuba sends more doctors per capita to Doctors Without Borders than any other country. That may or may not be the case. I don't know. I have no reason to disbelieve you. But, that's all well and good. And that's a good thing for people to be doing.
Right.
But without modern medicine, the Cuban doctors would be decades behind the United States if we weren't sharing our results with the rest of the class. We're the ones keeping the NHS and the Canadian healthcare systems not thoroughly in the dark ages. At the rate that we develop medical research papers and things like that, we develop them roughly 5 times more frequently than the next 5 countries combined.
And that's with the U.S. government trying to slow the thing down as much as it can.
Yeah. And of course, we don't keep all of these breakthroughs to ourselves because we're not jerks. We share them with the United Kingdom, with the European Union, with Canada, with Cuba.
The world.
Yeah,
that's science.
Essentially anyone who wants them. But they're not actually doing that research themselves. That's why the Charlie Gard case, which was the baby that was basically euthanized by the state because they wouldn't allow it to come to the United States to receive treatment. That's why they had to come to the United States in the first place, because our medicine, albeit more expensive, is also more advanced. If you need top-tier healthcare, you go to the United States. If you need cheap, routine healthcare, sure,
you
go to Canada.
Else.
But if you need a life-saving treatment to a rare disease, you don't go to Canada. You don't go to the United Kingdom. You go to the United States. So the excuses for these shortages were hollow. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world to use for electricity. That's no longer true, by the way. It's actually the United States. And 3 times more fresh water resources per person than the United States. The real reason my family went without water and electricity was the socialist economy, instituted by dictators Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. I don't know if I could characterize Chavez as a dictator. I'm certainly no fan of him, but I know the CIA attempted to institute a coup against him at one point. I think it was in 2007.
Did they succeed?
No. The support for Hugo Chavez as president of Venezuela was so overwhelmingly that it was one of the rare failures in the CIA's history.
Yeah, he was pretty popular, at least till the rationing started.
Yeah. So the welfare programs, many minimum wage hikes, hint, hint, and nationalizations implemented by their regimes resulted in a colossal government deficit that the central bank covered by simply printing more money, leading to rampant inflation. Now prices double every few weeks, and the standard of living continues to plummet. Yeah, that's the problem with allowing the government to control the currency, is that they can print it. This is why you should move to things like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, not Ethereum. Zencash, Zcash, Horizon, actually, not Zencash, and all of these other cryptocurrencies that are not controlled by a government cannot be inflated intentionally. Let's put it that way. They cannot be intentionally inflated. They are inherently inflationary. All cryptocurrencies so far are. But that's just sort of the nature of the beast at the moment. Now, even gold is somewhat inherently inflationary because new stars are constantly creating more gold and things like that. Rare though the element is in the grand view of things, it is constantly having more of it created. So even gold would qualify as being inherently inflationary if you really want to get technical about it. And here on the Call to Freedom, we don't mind getting technical about it.
No, most people would call that pedantic.
Maybe, but I mean, it's technically true, right? There is more gold being created in the universe every single second.
Yeah.
So that devalues the current gold in existence. That's inflation.
Now, go out to the next galaxy and get it.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. Maybe one day. But cryptocurrency is less inflationary than government currencies, and it cannot be inflated by any one particular group that happens to have a vested interest in making you lose all of your wealth. This is the Call to Freedom. We're going to talk more about Venezuela, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. This is the Call to Freedom here on LRN.FM. And we've been talking about Venezuela and the various failures of socialism and how socialism seems to need an influx of resources in order to sustain itself, because it comes back to the economic problem, which is that they can't actually calculate how to use resources most efficiently in the same way that a market does. So they need more resources because their system is so inefficient with those resources that they ultimately run out. But before we get back into that, if you've ever wanted to have sex with prostitutes and then arrest them, or bust people for drugs and then sell the drugs on the side for a nice little bonus, or just enjoy the power rush of being a cop without all the paperwork, then you should try the Thin Blue Line game, which can be found at thinbluelinegame.com. It's the only card game in the world that allows you to shoot someone over a broken taillight and then escape accountability with the magical phrase, "I feared for my life." You know, typical cop stuff. Get it now at thinbluelinegame.com. Assault and battery is not included, but for a limited time you can order your copies and use the coupon code CTF to have all shipping costs waived. So go get it. Again, that's thinbluelinegame.com. Now back to this story coming to us from an immigrant from Venezuela who came to the United States. Apparently, the welfare programs, all of these minimum wage hikes, creating unemployment, obviously. But, I had to say, it may not have been true socialism, is certainly a stupid phrase, but it doesn't sound like it was complete socialism in that the minimum wage sort of, at least to me, implies that these are private or quasi-private entities hiring people in the first place. So the government steps in and says this is the minimum amount you can pay these people for their labor. But under socialism, they would be directly employees of the state. So they may not have finished nationalizing everything, but they nationalized enough that they ran out of resources.
That's how it works.
And then there's the problem of inflation, which causes prices to double every few weeks, while the amount of money that people are making is obviously not doubling correspondingly or not increasing beyond doubling. Now, if the prices of goods increase by double every few weeks, then it would follow that you would have to, every few weeks, increase your earnings by more than a double in order to profit in the long run. Of course, that's never the case in regard to inflation. You never make it back. You never make up the full amount. That 100% increase in prices or whatever, you might get really, really close at like 98% or 99%. But not by definition, but by design, you're never going to offset the increase in prices caused by inflation. And this is how the banks ultimately, the central banks, ultimately take ownership of everybody and everything. They starve you to death slowly. So, coming back to this article, I watched what was once one of the richest countries in Latin America gradually fall apart under the weight of big government. I don't need to look at statistics to see this, but rather at my own family. Well, yeah, and your anecdotal evidence may work for you, but I think that most people would prefer, for you to deal in actual facts and statistics rather than an anecdotal story about your family. But okay,
most people like us would, but the story about the family is going to be important for some people. A lot of people, actually.
I think a lot of people are going to ignore it because it is just anecdotal evidence.
Well, those are not the people we need to reach.
I would argue that those are exactly the people we need to reach.
No, those are the people we've already reached.
Maybe. When Chavez took office in 1999, my parents were earning several $1,000s a month between the two of them. By 2016, due to inflation, they earned less than $2 American a day. If my parents had not fled the country for Spain in 2017, they would now be earning less than $1 per day. The international definition of extreme poverty. Even now, the inflation rate in Venezuela is expected to reach 10 million% this year. That is textbook hyperinflation.
Yeah, that's we're beyond the wheelbarrow stage. We're at the point where they're just dropping this stuff in the streets because it's worthless.
Isn't there a Venezuelan bolivar over there?
Yeah, one of the original ones before they started adding zero. Before they started chopping off all the zeros.
You can buy them at Forkfest and Porkfest, however, if you would like to. Of course, you're going to pay more for it than it's actually worth as far as, translating from one currency to the other. But you can buy like $1 trillion Venezuelan note for like $8 or $9.
As money, it is utterly, completely worthless. As a souvenir and a reminder, it is quite valuable.
I don't know about quite valuable, but it's an interesting item for people like us to own.
A couple from Zimbabwe up there, too. They had a similar thing happen last decade. So
yeah. So anyway, Venezuela has become a country where a woeful number of children suffer from malnutrition, and where working 2 full-time jobs will pay for only 6 pounds of chicken a month. I'm trying to contextualize what 6 pounds of chicken is. I don't eat chicken enough to know what a pound of chicken looks like.
Yeah.
I did it. What is that like? What is that like? 3 chicken breasts, maybe?
Yeah, a full rotisserie chicken will weigh probably around 2 pounds, I think.
Okay, so it's like 3 rotisserie chickens, basically.
Pretty much.
And that's working 2 full-time jobs. But, that it's interesting that he would even make that analogy, considering that, the allegation against Venezuela is that they don't have the rotisserie chickens to sell in the first place. I did have chicken yesterday, though.
Yeah, those things are on the black market now.
Are they? Interesting. Well, the black market is always something that arises when the government starts rationing things. It happened here in the United States during World War II, and the ration stamps. Butchers still had meat. The government just said, no, we want to make sure you don't run out. So we're not going to let you sell too much to specific people. And they were like, but we want to make money, so we're going to do it anyway. And that was how the black market came about during World War II.
Yep.
Though so many of us Venezuelans fled to the USA to escape from the destructive consequences of socialism, liberal politicians like Senator Bernie Sanders and Jose Serrano have praised the same kind of policies that produced famine, mass exodus, and soaring inflation in Venezuela. Even worse, in recent months, Democratic reps Omar, Cana, and Gabbard have mischaracterized the protests against Maduro and condemned President Donald Trump's widely supported moves to help end Maduro's dictatorship. Additionally, many congressional Democrats support Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, proposals that would nationalize the healthcare industry, guarantee that everyone who wants a job, and massively, wow, really? That's a really large scope. Guarantee everyone who wants a job?
Really?
And would massively raise taxes, increasing government intervention in the economy like few countries except Cuba and Venezuela have seen before. Proponents think that they can give all Americans quality health care, housing, and everything for free, and that somehow politicians can do a better job at running a business than business owners themselves.
Yeah, they always think that until Maduro happens.
Well, I mean, that's the contention behind F.A. Hayek's The Road to Serfdom in the first place, which if people haven't read, I would highly recommend it, is that, these central planners, they come along making all sorts of promises to fulfill all of these grand visions they have. And they may be well-intentioned. They may not be. They may just be using the entire thing as a scheme to get power over people. That would be my cynical approach to the subject.
Yeah, that seems to happen more often than not.
But it may also just be a result of what happens in phase 2 when you have that system in place and, it's there and exploitable to people who want power.
Yeah, once the state has taken over the means of production, what reason do they have to voluntarily give it back to the people?
Well, we wouldn't expect them to. That would be like phase 10, phase 11, that kind of thing starts happening.
You never get there.
I'm just talking about the second round of elected politicians to manage the socialist economy.
Okay.
But Hayek warned, it wasn't a character defect in the German people necessarily that caused them to fall under the banner of Nazism. It was the false promises being made by Hitler and his regime about being able to fix all of the problems in German society. And here in the United States, we see exactly that, coming from not just the Democrats, but the Republicans as well, in a slightly different form, arguing that all we have to do is let them take more and more control, and they can fix problems that they created in the first place. And even if they didn't create them, they intentionally rigged the economy and the system in such a way that the free market that you and I could not work together to fix those problems. Because that's what the state does. And even if individuals within it may be benevolent, the state itself as a whole is absolute evil. And this is the call to freedom. Welcome back. This is The Call to Freedom. I'm your host, as always, Aria of the anarchistgmail.com. Actually, that's no longer up. I've officially... No, it's not. I did it intentionally. I still own the domain name. There's just no website there. So I've got to find something else to promote right there. I'm sure I can find something. And I'm joined, as always, by...
Michael Hampton from CryptoTip.org.
Now, what is CryptoTip for those people who don't know?
CryptoTip, for those people who don't know, is a way to promote the use of cryptocurrency by printing small little paper tips which you can give out to people in small denominations like $1 or $2. Ian's printed some $25 ones. And you can just fund these with Dash or with Bitcoin Cash or whatever, and give them out to
it's basically
promote
just
what
one of these, right?
And what happens is, when somebody gets one of these, they can see a little explanation on the page there. You just print them on your printer at home, and
so they'll scan this QR code.
Yep,
and it will open a website for them.
It'll open a website. It'll explain what the cryptocurrency is, how they can use it. It's got a little YouTube video there they can watch too, and then it explains how they can download a wallet on their phone. It's got an actual link to the wallet, so they can just touch it right there, get the wallet on their phone, and then immediately claim the cryptocurrency, and it's all theirs.
What wallet does it download?
At the moment, I believe it's Edge Wallet.
Okay, interesting. I actually have to transition to Edge myself. I'm currently using Konami still.
Oh God, what a nightmare that thing is.
I've noticed that a lot of people that everyone here in the King community has moved away from Konami. I don't know why. I
never used it in the first place.
I seem to have missed a memo on the subject, but I'm still using Konami. I did move away from Jax of my own volition prior to finding out about the suckiness of Jax in general, and how they, as far as I'm aware, still have not provided people with their Bitcoin Cash. If I'm
from the split 2 years ago,
right?
Oh my!
If I'm understanding correctly, that still has not happened. But
you can just take your seed phrase out of Jax and put it in a different wallet.
Yeah, that's how they're recommending doing it, obviously. But Jax themselves, the Jax wallet, still does not support it. Which, if you're used to using the Jax wallet, is kind of problematic. Of course, Konami has a different problem in that it supports way, way too many cryptocurrencies. Like a mess of cryptocurrencies, more than 100 easily. Wow. And as I understand it, I think Edge has the same sort of philosophy of more is better.
Well, Edge hasn't gone quite that far. I think there's 20 or so.
Awesome. 20 is a manageable number, I think.
But you only get those if you specifically choose them. You don't have a humongous list.
Right, that's true for Konami as well. It's just they have a much longer list, and a ridiculously long list. That was always one of the things that I applauded Coinbase for, because as much as they do wrong, they are a gateway drug for people to get into cryptocurrency, and they historically did a pretty good job of being that gatekeeper, right? All they had was Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, and Ethereum.
Well, yeah.
And then they added others. And now they've just added so many where their primary role, as far as I was concerned, as the gatekeeper to keep people's grandmas from buying scam coins and things like that.
They gave it up.
Is no longer applicable. So screw Coinbase. If you're going to deal with an exchange that does not make sure only 100% valid cryptocurrencies are presentable, basic attention token, really, Konami? XRP, really? Then you might as well just use Kraken or Bitfinex, which is currently embattled by some sort of fiasco regarding Tether or something like that. But there seems to be actual proof now that the dollars that were supposed to back Tether did in fact exist. So I don't know. I'm not a fan of tethering cryptocurrencies to fiat currencies, so I have never owned Tether.
Yeah, it seems like the wrong way to go about it.
I did own some Nubits back in the day because it was originally pegged to the dollar, more or less. It would go up a little bit and it would go down a little bit, but it was a safe bet that if you needed to transition temporarily into a cryptocurrency while you waited on one to finish plummeting, or just, essentially, while you waited on them to go that direction, Nubits was a safe choice. Then last December happened. Not this past December, the one before. And even Nubits collapsed. I think it's 12 cents each now.
Wow.
So if you put your money into Nubits hoping to avoid the collapse, I'm sorry that you lost all of your money. Or not all of it, 90% of it. But so did most people who had cryptocurrency holdings in the first place. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, 2008 was a bad year for everybody in crypto.
You mean 2018?
18.
Okay.
2018, sorry.
I think 2008 was probably pretty good.
2008 was a pretty non-existent year for crypto.
I thought that was right after Bitcoin started.
Satoshi published the paper at the end of 2018. The first block
it was not 2018.
2008. Sorry.
Okay.
See, I'm doing it again. But the first block was mined in January of 2009.
Okay, so yeah, it was just before. So I guess 2008 technically was a good year for cryptocurrency because that was when the Satoshi white paper released.
Right.
So that's good. So anyway, we've been talking about Venezuela, and there's more to get into because this ties into Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, and everything that's happening in the United States and that is likely to happen in the next few years. These proposals from... Did we skip a section? So let's reiterate, I guess. Many Democrats support Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, proposals that would nationalize the healthcare industry and guarantee everyone who wants a job, and would massively raise taxes. Obviously, they've got to pay for all of that stuff somehow, and there's no way to do that except to take it from the productive classes.
Yeah, so, here we're gonna take $20 away from you and give you 10 back.
Yeah, proponents. I mean, that's exactly Yang's UBI scheme. Is that he wants to give Americans $1,000 a month, which sounds great until you ask him how in the world the government is going to pay for $1,000 a month to every single citizen. And his answer is, we're going to implement the value-added tax. But I totally promise it won't be a net loss for people, which
There's no way for it not to be.
Yeah, it's absolutely stupid on its face. The best case scenario is that they use some sort of artificial intelligence to actually perpetually keep these numbers balanced, and no one makes any money, and no one loses any money. That's the absolute best case scenario, is that Yang basically takes $1,000 from you and gives it back to you and says, aren't you glad the government loves you? That's the best that could come from his policy. The worst and by far the most likely outcome is that they take $1,200 from you and give you $1,000, or they take $1,500 from you, or because they don't want to take $1,500 for you, they just inflate the ever-loving crap out of the currency. They just print it, which is what Ocasio-Cortez wants to do to pay for the New Deal in the first place.
Or most likely they do both, tax you and inflate.
Wow, that's so horribly incorrect. Stephen TVP has said the UBI is a Band-Aid to fix the final stages of capitalism. No. It's to ease the transition from this light socialism to heavier socialism. There is nothing in the United States that qualifies as what we would characterize as capitalism. There is no free market. Nothing is free here in the United States. And by that, I don't mean it has no cost. I mean that it's not that you have no freedom.
Liberty.
Yeah. Nothing, no market has liberty in the United States. Everything is overregulated, subsidized by the state, paid for by U.S. tax dollars, everything. From light bulb manufacturers to toilet paper to insert random thing to your vehicles. Who do you think paid for the Dodge bailouts? It was the American taxpayers. So we're subsidizing all of these industries, and when they break, because we have privatized profits and socialized losses, we go, capitalism is the problem. No, capitalism is a system of privatized profits and privatized losses. If a company loses money, they have to deal with that. They don't get bailed out by the taxpayers. That's not capitalism. That's not the free market. That's socialism. It's socialism to go before the government and say, hey, we have all of these employees and we can't pay them. And the government goes, don't worry about it. We got you covered. Okay, he was being sarcastic. That makes sense. This is the call to freedom. Welcome back. This is the Call to Freedom, and unfortunately our phone lines are down, but you can give us a call if you'd like to weigh in on the subject at discord.lrn.fm. We expect the phone lines to be back up by tomorrow, so
Yeah, it's all my fault. I admit it. I didn't pay a bill, and the reason I didn't pay a bill is because they didn't email me the bill, which
That does make it hard to pay them.
So I got the server end of that sorted out, but the other end of it, which is the configuration for the little voice over IP box in the studio, I haven't got sorted out because there are hard-coded IP addresses everywhere, and I had to change the IP address. So I missed a few, and that's why we're not having phone lines right now.
No problem. But you're invited to give us a call anyway using the Discord lines at discord.lrn.fm. You get clearer quality with that anyway. In fact, I would like to not even take calls via the landline. I would like to take them just through Discord because, one, it's easier to screen people. If a troll joins Discord because they want to troll the show, you're going to see that they just joined the server. I mean, you can scroll up and look, oh, this guy's been in the server for 3 minutes and he's calling the show. There's a 98% chance this person is just trolling. There is some chance that they're there to have a legitimate call, but not always. So anyway, we've been talking about Venezuela, and the universal basic income is what we've digressed onto, which is a proposition by a lot of people, actually, that basically says the government should pay you to exist. It's this idea that it's so hard to get a job, or actually, it's not even that, because there's plenty of work to do. It's that the economy is so broken that the only way to fix it is to break it further. And that is idiotic. It's idiotic on its face, even if you don't dive into the technicalities of, okay, well, we need $1,000 per citizen in order to give each citizen $1,000 per month. Where are we going to get this $1,000?
You're going to print it or you're going to tax it?
Yeah, they're going to tax the bulk of it. I would say probably 75 to 80% of it.
Yeah.
And the rest will be covered by inflation.
And then you have overhead, so it's not going to be just you take $1,000 from Peter and pay Paul with it. It's going to be you take $1,200 from Peter, pay $200 to a government bureaucrat, and give $1,000 to Paul.
Yeah. And you're not going to do that, to be clear. If you want to give Paul $1,000, hey, more power to you. That's your right as a human being to share your wealth with people, and it's a good thing. Isn't charitable acts are good things. Don't live stream it to Facebook, you freaking jerks. Other than that, if you want to be charitable, do it. Just don't use it as a photo opportunity. But having the government do something that you think is morally good is not morally good. Just because you think that it's good to feed the poor doesn't make robbing me a morally good act, even if you intend to use that money to feed the poor. It's still morally wrong to take stuff that isn't yours.
Yeah.
And that's true if we're talking about some random person breaking into my house to steal my money, or someone at work stealing my money to buy drugs with. I don't really care what the purpose is. My money is mine.
Yeah, if you're gonna take my money at gunpoint and give it to someone else, at least have the intellectual honesty to point the gun at me yourself instead of getting your friends at the IRS to do it.
So we've been talking about Venezuela before we segued into the UBI, and about how the Green New Deal and Medicare for All, these two proposals by young upstart Ocasio-Cortez, who isn't making any fans on Capitol Hill. Oh, but I meant to say this before we got off the subject of the UBI, is that, we went into the technicalities of it and the failures of it during the last segment. I'm not going to rehash all of that and how they can't possibly actually pay for it. The only way they could is by The only way they could is by increasing taxes 100% correspondingly, which completely defeats the purpose, or increasing taxes to some percentage of it and just printing the rest, which is going to cause inflation and an increase in prices and things like that otherwise offsets the rest of it, while also making you poorer, which is what happened in socialism, and why this upper middle class family of college graduates ended up going from where they were owning their own house and things like that to all of them living in an apartment together, making less than $1 per week, I think is what he said.
$1 per day.
Was it $1 per day?
Yeah. Extreme poverty.
And it was inflation that caused that. And of course, we saw it during World War II, prior to World War II in Germany as well, and in Zimbabwe and all of these other places.
Zimbabwe, Argentina, the list goes on and on.
And when the government starts inflating the currency to pay for the things it wants to do, that's the problem. But Stephen has pointed out what I keep wanting to get into and keep digressing on other subjects is this entire thing is not about taking care of the American people. It is a scheme to make us dependents of the state. If you look around today and you talk about abolishing the state, the government, like I do, you're going to be met universally by responses like, well, but then we won't have any roads. Then we won't have any bridges. Then we won't have any police. We won't have any firefighters. We won't have telephones. We won't have internet. How will we have any of this stuff? We won't have an education system. There will be no schools. Are you a lunatic? Why do you hate roads, Aria? That's what we get when we talk about abolishing the state. And it's absolute nonsense.
Have you seen the road right outside the studio here, River Street?
Well, just disregarding the condition of the road. It's absolute nonsense. Roads existed long before the Department of Transportation. They existed long before the government was responsible for creating them. We had schools long before the Department of Education. We had affordable health care long before Medicare and Medicaid.
And HMOs.
We had doctors who were willing to provide free care to people who were poor because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and they come to your house, too.
And this all went away as cataloged by Dr. Ron Paul, an actual medical doctor who lived through this. It all went away. That mentality among doctors that, they should provide service to the poor for free, it went away because suddenly the government would pay them for that. So why would they do it for free? Why would they go down to poor Jim's house and help him with his sickness when they can instead make Jim come to them and get paid for it? So that's what happened with the healthcare industry. But of course you have America's but otherwise the poor can't get health care without Medicaid. The poor can't be educated without the Department of Education and all this. So anything that the government does within just a few very short generations, not even whole generations, we're talking the span of maybe
50 years.
Yeah, not even that long. I was going to say 20 or 30 years. You end up with populations of people who are just absolutely convinced that the only way that anything could happen or that particular thing could happen is if the government provided it. So if you start providing people with $1,000 every single month, they're going to become dependent on that $1,000 a month. They're going to count on it being in their bank account, and they're going to pre-spend it accordingly on bills, allocating it to groceries or whatever. They're going to spend it. They're not going to save it, obviously. Most people won't.
Yeah.
And they're going to become dependent on it. And then when you talk to those people about abolishing the government or abolishing these social welfare programs, you're no longer just talking about getting rid of all this fluff. You're talking about taking away this money that they suddenly need and that they genuinely don't believe they could exist without. And just like that, we become permanent wards of the state. This is the call to freedom. Welcome back. This is the Call to Freedom. I, of course, am the composer of that music that you're hearing, your host, Aria DiMezzo. You can listen to the full song at soundcloud.com/Aria DiMezzo. That's AriaDimezzo. But if you don't know how to spell my name by now, we might have a problem. Maybe you're new to the show, though. So it is a difficult name for people to spell. But hey, that's the last name I've chosen.
Well, that's Americans, and I blame the public schools.
Well, DiMezzo is not a common last name. Interesting, I've learned that it is, in fact, a relatively common last name among, well, not relatively common, but it is a existent last name among Italians. So that's interesting. I, of course, am not Italian. I just identify as one. I don't even identify as one. When people ask me if I'm Italian, I tell them no, that they just assume I am because I happen to pick the name DiMezzo. There's a reason I picked the name Aria DiMezzo, and if you're curious why, Google it using an E instead of an I. If you use an I, it's going to generate me as the search results most of the time, depending on your previous search histories and things like that. If you use the E, it will point you to the song that I'm actually referring to as having named myself after, because it's one of the most beautiful pieces of music that I've ever heard. So anyway, these proposals, the Green New Deal and the other Medicare for All stupid thing that we talked about, would skyrocket the budget deficit and the national debt, which just reached a record $22 trillion.
Now, do you have any thought in your head that the U.S. government is ever actually going to pay off the national debt? Is that number ever going to go down?
Good Lord, no. It is not. It may go down briefly, if we somehow get a really
another surplus,
libertarianish government in office.
Like I think there was a surplus once or twice in the Clinton administration. It might have.
There was during the internet boom and things like that, but that was during an enormous technological boom,
right?
But he did actually pay off the national debt, didn't he?
Paid off a little tiny sliver of it.
Oh, I
thought
we paid off the entire thing.
No,
okay,
that's never happened.
Well, it really raises the question of who in the freaking hell is this national debt owed to?
This stuff goes back to before the Civil War.
Well, it's not really,
not all
because of the greenback and stuff like that. But that's the question that I think people should ask. Who does this national debt go to? Who do we owe this debt to? And most people go, well, we owe the debt to China, but that's not true. China, we owe China money, sure, but China also owes us money. The whole thing is just I almost said a bad word. It's a cluster mess. And I really don't want to get into the nuances of Chinese-American trade relations, but basically we shouldn't have our governments trading with one another in the first place. The businesses within the United States should be trading with the businesses within China, and I don't see why that's such a controversial thing to suggest, except it prevents the government from getting their slice with things like tariffs and taxes and customs and all of that nonsense. So yes, the national debt is owed to the Federal Reserve Bank, which is a coalition of 12 private banks like J.P. Morgan Chase, the Bank of America, and other huge multinational banks that are repeatedly in the news for just flagrant wrongdoing, like the Bank of America. Some of the money is not enough. They need all of the money. So they opened up fake accounts with their customers' names and information in order to skew their books and steal from their customers.
Wow.
And there was absolutely no fallout from this, no repercussion for this. I actually got really pissed off at Disturbed, the rock band, for this, because they then went on to play at the Bank of American Theater somewhere. I was like, you guys talk about all this social awareness recently in your songs. You talk about being responsible people, fighting the institutions, fighting the power and things like that, and how we're all, powerful, we just don't utilize it. And here you are choosing to continue playing for this bank that literally just stole money from poor people. So shut up with your little, it's time to fight the system, when you are the biggest bootlickers I've ever seen. So yeah, that's where the debt is owed. It's to the Federal Reserve Bank. It's to private banks, basically, because for some reason, the United States government had this brilliant idea that it would just be totally awesome if we let this coalition of 12 private banks print all of our money and then loan it to us at interest in exchange for treasury notes that we then, or treasury bonds rather, that we then had to buy back by paying interest on them.
Yeah, whose bright idea was this?
And of course, this debt can only be paid back in the currency that they're printing in the first place. And it doesn't take a lot to figure out that if you buy $100 and you have to pay back $110, and that's the only $100 in existence, then it's literally impossible for you to ever get out from under that debt, because that $10 of interest doesn't exist.
Yeah.
The only way to make it exist is to borrow it. So then you borrow $10 so you can pay back that 10% imaginary interest they fixed onto it. And in order to but you can't fully pay that back.
So now you owe $21.
Yeah. Well, now you owe $11. We're assuming that they didn't use the $100. They just borrowed it, held it for a few days, and then paid it back. Whatever. But they still had the $10 of interest to pay, so they had to borrow $10 of interest in order to pay. They had to borrow $10 in order to pay back that interest on the first debt, and then they have to borrow again to pay the interest on the third debt. And of course, all of that is assuming that they don't use the principal, which they obviously will. That's why they borrowed it in the first place. I want this $100 so I can go to the grocery store. Of course, the government doesn't go to the grocery store.
No, they buy things like roads.
But that is how the entire scheme works. It's how it was set up from the beginning. So it's impossible for us to ever escape the national debt. So, yeah, I guess I should have realized that we never did back during the Clinton administration. I just, wasn't thinking in that particular direction. So anyway, but this is all going to be paid for, according to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, by just printing the money. You just pay for it, right? Even so, liberal economist Paul Krugman recently argued in the column that whenever you see someone invoking Venezuela as a reason not to consider progressive policy ideas, you know right away that the person in question is uninformed, dishonest, or both. Now, we've been asked what the national debt is per person on our YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/Aria di Mezzo. The last time I calculated it, the national debt, I think, was $19 trillion, and it came out to $66,666.67 per citizen. Which, yeah.
I think it's a bit higher than that now.
Well, it would be slightly higher than that because there's a new $1 trillion onto it. But, it's basically, the number. It was then the number of the beast, essentially, which I thought was just hilarious.
Yeah, that's funny.
I made a meme of it with Baphomet statue right there. It was pretty funny. But so this guy can assure Mr. Krugman that he's neither uninformed nor dishonest.
Yeah, if I were going to say someone was uninformed and dishonest, Paul Krugman would be my first choice there. Well, sold his soul. I mean,
all he does is rail against cryptocurrencies and say stupid things.
I mean, he's an actual economist. He wrote the book on macro, and he sells his soul in the New York Times every day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's not unusual for economists. That's why the Austrians stood out to the degree that they did, because no one has any need for an economist, right, in a free market. No one needs that. No one needs them to say, oh, by the way, this system works, and we can prove it mathematically because the system is there working. What they need is an economist to come out and say, this system that appears to be totally broken, it's fine. Don't even worry about it. I'm an economist. Here's this 3,000-page essay I wrote proving that what I'm saying is right, that I'm not a lunatic. Oh, government, pay me for this $3,000 article, and I will justify your power grabs to the American people who get the feeling that this economy is broken, but who lack the intellectual capacity to explain what they feel is wrong. That's the role of economists. And that's why they won't exist in a free market. So to protect their jobs, they peddle for the state. Welcome back. This is The Call to Freedom here on LRN.FM. And I'd like to take a second to remind you that our podcasts have moved, and they can no longer be found at Spreaker. Instead, they can be found on Podbean at podbean.com calltofreedomlive.podbean.com. You can also find them on Spotify, Google Play Music, and iTunes. And for those who get tired of hearing the commercials, that's a good thing because the podcast does not include them. It's just the audio segments.
Us.
So, yep. Definitely check those out if you're interested. And, of course, they go with you forever. That's calltofreedomlive.podbean.com. So we've been talking about socialism and the increasing trend of, oh, my dear God, why would you do that? Go back. I clicked on a cartoon during the break because I wanted to see more of them to see what other points they got into. And then when I closed out of the cartoon, it took me to the USA Today homepage for some stupid reason instead of back to the article that I was literally reading.
It's the USA Today webpage. It works like that. If you click on the wrong thing, it goes to the homepage.
But I clicked on an X of something that I opened that came up in a separate
The way they've
layer.
Designed the site, you click on anything that's not actually that doesn't actually look clickable, it goes to the homepage.
Well, everything. I don't click on things that look unclickable for the most part.
Like click on that, like on the left and right where the dark background is. If you click there, it'll go to the homepage.
Interesting. I will try that in a moment. But in his recent State of the Union address, President Trump said that America will never be a socialist country. Well, he's wrong. America already is a socialist country. The only difference between us and Venezuela is that we still we're more fascism than socialism, I would argue, and that socialism is when the state directly takes control of an industry, and fascism is when the industries are appointed and regulated and endorsed by the state.
The control's a little more indirect.
Yeah, they still work on behalf of the state and still function on behalf of the state and still get most of their money from the state. But there is an additional veil between them that doesn't make the control so overly obvious.
Yeah, like the best example of that right now is probably China.
The best example of what?
Fascism.
Oh, I think it's the United States.
I mean, I give the U.S. number 2 but I guess you could go either way there.
Well, I mean, our listeners are going to be more familiar with the situation in the United States than they are the situation in China as well.
I don't know. Maybe we should do a poll
about whether or not our American audience is more familiar with the American economy than the Chinese economy.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet that the poll on that would be that I'm correct. But yeah, so that's what I would characterize as the difference between fascism and socialism, is that fascism sort of has this interplay between corporations, which are, of course, created and upheld by the state, and the state itself, where the corporations run the state and the state runs the corporations. And that's sort of what we have here in the United States. Not socialism per se. Socialism actually removes that little pretend wall that exists between the two and just allows the state to directly own the quote-unquote corporations by nationalizing them. So we may not be a socialist country. He's correct. We're a fascist one.
Right.
And that's not to say that President Donald Trump is a fascist, at least not in the sense that the average leftist calls him a fascist, because I don't think he is, at least not any more so than Bernie Sanders or Yang or any of these other politicians. They're all fascists. They all want to control the private industry.
Right.
And to that end, they think that the state needs the power to control private industry. They want to keep it what they call private, just like they don't want to actually take your home. They want you to call yourself your home owner and all of that nonsense, even though you literally have to pay rent to the government every single year, or they will kick you out and take it from you. So you cannot be the property owner here in the United States of anything that is a capital good. If it is a consumer good, things like deodorant and toothpaste and toilet paper, sure, you can own that, but you can also own those under socialism. So the difference between socialism, fascism, and capitalism, or free marketism, whatever you would like to call it, is not about the ownership of consumer goods. It doesn't mean that your neighbor can come in any of these circumstances and just help himself to your toothpaste. It means that you, under socialism, the toothpaste factory is owned by the state directly, and the people who work there are state employees. Under fascism, it means that the toothpaste factory is regulated, propped up, paid for ultimately by the state and taxpayer dollars, but that there's still some CEO figurehead and things like that who just happens to make yearly donations to presidential campaigns and senatorial campaigns and things like that. So that's the distinction between them. The capital good, of course, is the one that produces. It's the one that becomes an investment. It's the one that returns a greater value than it initially had. You're not allowed to own those in the United States. The government will permit you access to them if you pay them enough money and if you're going to use it in a way that they deem to be appropriate. But if you, like, vehicles have become largely production goods or capital goods, but you don't actually own your vehicle, do you? Or you may, but you can't actually use it without government permission. And even then, you can't use it to directly earn money because the government is attempting to crack down on Uber and Lyft and things like that and these other delivery services that they don't approve of because they didn't get properly licensed by the state in the same way that taxi cab drivers did.
They didn't spend enough time licking boots.
Yep. Well, they can't, right? Because they're just ordinary people trying to make a few extra bucks and destroy their cars in the process, by the way. But, short-term gain versus long-term gain, especially when the long-term loss, rather, is invisible to the average person, as it is in the case with delivering food for, D'Angelo's here or being an Uber driver. The damage to your vehicle is essentially invisible. But it's permanent, and it's going to destroy your vehicle ultimately, especially all of those short trips and things like that within a city or a town. It's terrible for your vehicle. But, of course, when those costs are invisible, there's not as much resistance to them. And that's the case whether we're talking about cab drivers or Uber drivers, or if we're talking about the state and its regulations on various industries. We don't know what all technologies we could have today that we don't have because the federal government impeded them. I would like to ask the question of why the United States Postal Service was not the inventor of email. It seems to me that if there was a government agency responsible for delivering messages to people, aka the post office, they would have been the ones to invent this new method of delivering messages to people. But they didn't. Private industry did. If private industry was not able to create email for whatever reason, that let's say it was illegal for any other company to facilitate the messages from one person to another as a sort of way to give the United States Postal Service a monopoly over just the entire idea of delivering messages, then email would have never come into existence. And even today, we would probably still not have email because of the state monopoly over conveying messages from one person to another, which would be illegal under that particular example. But the best example is probably home laser removal kits for hair, which would be freely available, or not freely available. They would obviously cost money, but they would be available in stores. You could walk into Walmart and pay $100 and have a little device to remove whatever hair you wanted to get rid of. But you can't have that, and it's because of government regulations. You would also have tattoo removal kits available at Walmart, which you don't have because of government regulations. Because of the fear that someone might accidentally burn their hand off or something like that, however founded or unfounded that may be, the problem with it is that people are so afraid of it that they're not going to allow responsible people who actually do the research on these things decide that, hey, you know, I want this thing, I'm going to go buy it, and I'm going to use it responsibly. So because of all of that, lasers were regulated to the point where only licensed, trained medical professionals know how to point this thing at you and let it run and, you know, move automatically or whatever. A home laser kit would probably have cameras to take care of this sort of thing. I mean, it's really not critically important how these sorts of things were designed, but we certainly have the technology to make these things portable and reusable and available at home, but we don't have them. The reason we don't have them is because lasers are just considered so dangerous that only trained medical professionals are allowed to use them.
Which is ridiculous.
It is. And it keeps us from having this technology that a lot of people would like to have. I learned to tattoo by tattooing myself. I would like to remove these and redo them, but I can't because tattoo removal is stupidly expensive because I can't just go down to Walmart and buy the kit that should be available but isn't because of government regulations. And this is the call to freedom. And we're going to get more into socialism. Welcome back. This is the Call to Freedom. As always, I'm your host, Aria DeMezzo, of Aria Uncensored, which you can watch on DLive and Twitch at dlive.lrn.fm and twitch.lrn.fm every Tuesday, well, almost every Tuesday night at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I originally did the show topless and got us banned from Twitch in so doing. Well, temporarily suspended from Twitch in so doing.
That was, what, a 3-day ban over the weekend?
Yeah. So it will no longer be topless, per se. I'm not sure yet exactly what I'm going to do. I don't know. There's so many options. I want to just stream it to Pornhub instead. I think
we could stream to Pornhub.
I think that's what I want to do.
Add it to vMix.
Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't be hard to set up. I mean, I've got the profile already there. All I have to do is create the Pornhub account and get a stream key and blah, blah, blah. And voila, Aria Uncensored, streamed only to Pornhub. Would be hilarious. And YouTube at youtube.com/Aria DeMezzo. I think that would be the funniest response to this. Twitch banning me for nudity? Okay, well then I'm taking my show to Pornhub. And I'm joined, as you hear, by
Michael Hampton from BitcoinHistory.com.
And we've been talking about socialism and
Venezuela.
And all of that. Yeah, and it's a mess over there. But it's also a mess over here, and it is increasingly becoming a new mess, as characterized by the Foundation for Economic Education. We now have Bernie Sanders running for office. Weird. I've never seen those particular options. Sorry. Proud, self-described socialist Bernie Sanders is running for president again and has already raised over $10 million for his campaign. Rising Democratic star Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, also a proud, self-described socialist, has promoted a Green New Deal, which has whipped up a frenzy among young populist activists and emerged as a key litmus test for prospective 2020 presidential candidates, drawing support from many of them. There's a long list of them. So someone in D-Life has said, tranny strongly desires to be degenerate to get attention. Imagine my shock. Well, I feel like I should probably inform you. I don't desire to be degenerate. I simply am. In fact, the LRN server at discord.lrn.fm has my name as Proud Degenerate. So, yeah.
Hey, it's fun.
It is fun. I desire to be funny. And obviously everything we do, not just as human beings, that's not what I mean, but everything I do in regard to the show and my public persona and all of that is to get attention. By definition, we want viewers, we want listeners, we want sponsors.
Yeah, that's why we do a show.
Yeah, that's why we do everything that we do, is because we want attention from people. So that we do things occasionally to get attention from people should not be surprising, whether one is trans or not. Even if one assumes that the shift of mainstream progressive politicians toward the far left is a calculated self-serving act. No, it's a stupid act, and it's going to cause them to lose in 2020 because they learned nothing from 2016.
Yeah, they're working hard to reelect Trump here.
They are. And the issue for the Democratic Party, for the left in general, is that they walked away from the 2016 election with the conclusion that the candidate, Hillary Clinton, was not far left enough.
No, that's not what happened at all.
Well, it isn't, but that the Democratic Party as a whole was not far left enough.
No,
so
they went too far.
Their response to this is to go even further to the left, and it is not going to work out.
Well, they want Trump to win in a landslide this time?
Well,
It was close last time. But
I don't know that he's going to win in a landslide. We weren't close to a landslide last time.
No, it was a close election.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought you meant close to a landslide when you said we were close last time. Okay, got you. No problem. There were people, Trump included, I think, who characterized it as a landslide.
No, that was not a landslide. That was like a razor-thin margin.
Yeah, it was pretty narrow. But that's Trump for you. So
he can't stop lying.
For the purposes of this article coming to us from the Foundation for Economic Education, the definition of socialism, which he's going to use from the Library of Economics and Liberties definition, is a centrally planned economy in which the government controls all means of production. I don't agree with that assessment because, first of all, I don't think it's necessary to control all means of production in order to qualify as socialism. Just the majority of them, or just the most critical ones, even.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessary for the government to actually control the toothpaste factories if they control the automobile factories. There's a bit of a priority scaling here, so I don't think all is a good word.
Even most, or a good chunk of them. I mean, if you nationalize the oil refineries and the oil fields and all that, pretty soon the oil is going to stop flowing.
Yeah. And he goes on to say that this is synonymous with communism. It is not synonymous with communism. And I'm no communist, but communism is when the people directly own the means of production. Socialism is when they own it via the state, in theory. That they use some sort of democratic state process to control the means of production, while communism allows them to do it directly. That's why communism actually gets pretty close to anarcho-syndicalism, which I'm also not a fan of. But yes, there is a key distinction between socialism and communism, in that communism is inherently anarchistic. Or anarchic, whatever. So the end goal of socialism is to abolish private property. That's incorrect. That's the end goal of socialism. Free markets, exchange prices and profits, I will give you those, and substitute collective ownership and decision-making to determine the allocation of resources. And decision-making to determine the allocation of resources. That's stupid. That's the dumbest thing he's written so far. And he's written a couple of dumb things. Yes, they want to implement decision-making into the allocation of resources.
Didn't he say collective decision-making? Did I hear that wrong?
Well, he said collective ownership.
Collective ownership.
But I mean, even collective ownership and decision-making isn't unheard of in the free market. You have businesses and things like that doing it all the time.
Yeah.
The difference is the statism, the state determining the allocation of resources. It's not that there is decision-making, or, maybe he did mean that, and he just phrased it so badly that he needs to be slapped and fired from writing for the Foundation for Economic Education. So throughout history, socialism advocates and practitioners have made heartfelt appeals in the names of fairness, egalitarianism, and humanitarianism.
Yeah, I read one of those in the New York Times the other day.
Although I do consider myself to be an individualist, an egalitarian, technically, except it's more individualist than collectivist. So it's individualist egalitarianism, I would say. And certainly, I wouldn't characterize myself as a humanitarian either. Maybe an earthlingarian, I guess. I want good things for all species on Earth and not necessarily just humans. I don't give a crap, though, about fairness. I don't know why anyone should. I was dealt a relatively unfair shake in life. It happens. Rush wrote the song The Larger Bowl about it. It's a pretty good song. Fairness is not real, and you cannot make the universe fair via legislation. There will always be differences between people, and those differences will manifest in disproportionate amounts of wealth and wacky wealth redistribution. Distribution, not redistribution. So many millennials lived through the 2007-2008 financial crisis, and a large number of those ended up inventing cryptocurrencies as a result and investing heavily in cryptocurrencies. Because we saw what banks did when they controlled the economy. So we're like, okay, well, here's a currency that the banks don't control. Let's get into it. With uncertain job prospects and crushing student loans, Gen Z, the newest kids on the block, grew up with smartphones in their pockets before they started high school and do not remember a time before the internet. I really don't want them to go extensively into these subjects that are going to make me feel old. I wish they would not do that. This is the Call to Freedom. We're going to talk more about millennials and Gen Z, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. This is the Call to Freedom. As always, you're invited to give us a call. Right now, the phone lines are down, but you can give us a call on Discord by using discord.lrn.fm. And there's always ongoing chat there that you can join in with anyway. So I would highly recommend you do that. They are during the Call to Freedom, they are very rarely discussing anything that is actually on topic. But it's
always something interesting.
It's always interesting, nonetheless. So we've been talking about socialism and Venezuela, and apparently the increasing trend among younger generations to be fans of big government and big government control of industry. So living in an economically uncertain world in which anyone with a smartphone can easily document an unjustified police shooting, it's understandable that many young people are drawn towards social justice activism. Thus, it's unsurprising that radical ideologies, such as socialism, with its promise to deliver a fairer, more equal, and more just world, are gaining in popularity among youth. There's something interesting in there that I ended up losing mentally.
The idea that socialism could be fair or just?
Well, I mean, again, it could be. Our implementations of it have been pretty bad, but sure. Socialism, if we only had the right people there, could work just fine. It could produce a fair, equal, and just world. It's not likely to.
Where are you going to find the right people?
I don't have to find the right people.
Do they even exist?
In theory, they do. And in theory, they could exist. And in theory, they could find them. I'm not willing to say that they can't. Because, in theory, they certainly could. I just don't think it's likely. And I think that's the reason that we keep ending up with socialist collapses, because in their quest to produce these utopias, they keep falling into the hands of the wrong people who do not have any interest in fulfilling the promises that they're making. But in and of itself, I cannot criticize socialism for being socialism. It's the implementations of socialism that have been problematic, not the ideology itself. Real injustices and systemic oppression do exist in the United States. But as a young first-generation Chinese-American immigrant, the author has a message for many of his peers and fellow American citizens. Socialism is not the answer. Despite its lofty promises to deliver freedom from want, perfect man, and even transform human nature itself, ultimately ushering in heaven on earth, socialism has instead resulted in hell in every place it has been tried. Again, this is an issue with the implementation rather than the idea. And I would argue that there's probably something inherently within the idea that is flawed and that is causing these implementations to fail. But in theory, this utopian worldview that they propagate as idealistic could work. So today, the ongoing collapse of socialist Venezuela continues to bring untold suffering to its people. In his foreword to the 50th anniversary of the Gulag Archipelago, Jordan Peterson asked us to reflect on this indisputable reality. And this is going to be my first experience with anything Jordan Peterson has ever said. I don't know anything about the guy. I've had people ask me my opinion on him. I don't have an opinion. I've never heard anything he said or read anything he wrote.
Yeah, I've heard he's some kind of celebrity, but I've never actually heard anything he read or wrote.
So this is your first experience with Peterson as well. Interesting. No political experiment has ever been tried so widely, with so many disparate people in so many different countries, with such different histories, and failed so absolutely and so catastrophically. Is it mere ignorance, albeit of the most inexcusable kind, that allows today's Marxists to flaunt their continued allegiance, to present it as compassionate and care? Or is it instead envy of the successful in near infinite proportions, or something akin to hatred for mankind itself? How much proof do we need? Why do we still avert our eyes from the truth? Now, I would argue that it's actually both of those. It's nihilism, in effect. It's I think they know on some deep level that happens totally unconsciously. I think they know that socialism tends to result in widespread death. And I think that this is what they ultimately desire, is widespread death, not just for themselves, but for everyone, because they are full of self-loathing and self-hatred. And I can't currently get into the many, many examples that lead me to conclude this, but there's things like the inversion of virtue, which is where they exonerate the victim and hate the strong, which of course is evolutionarily backward. And if you apply that widely to look, there is a reason that compassion did not evolve in the wild, right? Because to some extent it did, but let's not get into the nuances of that. But there's a reason that if a gazelle sees another gazelle being eaten by a lion, it's not going to try to save the gazelle being eaten. It's because that's destructive of the organism. And compassion follows those same tendencies. It is nihilistic. It is bad. I will say that. Compassion is evolutionarily bad. It causes someone who is not in a bad position to put themselves in a bad position out of sympathy or pity. Nietzsche, of course, characterized it as pity is made contagious. No, what was it? Suffering is made contagious by pity. And he's not wrong, but I think that's a viewpoint that we shouldn't actually let encompass our worldviews. I tend to be a compassionate person, even as I recognize that, there has to be a limit to this compassion. Just because I feel badly for the gazelle that's being eaten by the lion doesn't mean it makes sense for me to interfere in that and to try to fight the lion or something equally stupid.
Yeah, that wouldn't work out well for you.
No, and such a trait, if widespread within a species, it would obviously cause the annihilation of that species, because you would have a bunch of gazelles trying to rescue this other gazelle from this predator that they simply cannot fight. So how would compassion really have evolved? I think that's an interesting question. It's not one that I'm capable of answering, but I think it's one that needs to be dove into because we are, of course, animals. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the biological or evolutionary roots of compassion and pity? Because it doesn't seem like they could evolve or exist naturally in the wild without causing the destruction of the pitying or sympathetic species. So, all of that said, I think all of that is related, and that compassion is that they are compassionate, but it leads them into dark roads of nihilism and self-destruction. That was what I was trying to get at before I totally lost my train of thought and started talking about gazelles.
Gotcha.
So, in sum, socialism has failed empirically and morally. So why are so many young Americans enjoying political freedom, stable institutions, and economic opportunities envied and desired by so many other people across the world, willing to sell their birthright for a failed, regressive ideology? And we're going to get into the answer to that question, so don't go anywhere. This is the Call to Freedom.
I really want to know.
Welcome back. This is the Call to Freedom, and we've been talking about socialism and the destruction it causes, and going over a very lengthy anecdotal account of someone who lived in socialist Venezuela and who watched it become just poorer and poorer over the decade or so since they actually implemented full-blown socialism, which of course now is not real socialism. Although, a decade ago, it certainly was, or maybe 2 decades ago.
Yeah, if it collapses, it wasn't real socialism.
No.
Right?
So the author from Feed goes on to say that he's heard plenty of horror stories from his parents who grew up in Maoist China with regular food shortages, being deprived of other basic needs that today they take for granted. Censorship and ideological conformity were rigidly enforced in an environment that has been described as an Auschwitz of the mind.
They still are.
Yeah, they certainly, they like their re-education camps there in China. They have the entire Uyghur Muslim population locked in, well, not the entire Uyghur population, but quite a lot of it.
Yeah, a good chunk of that population.
Yeah, where they're being force-fed beef and things like that because obviously religious beliefs interfere with socialism, which is unabashed statism, which is a religion in and of itself. You can't serve 2 gods, so one of them has to be eliminated. And the state obviously has no interest in helping you to eliminate itself, so it's instead going to eliminate Allah or Yahweh or insert deity here from your religious belief so that it can plant itself there instead. And this is actually, as I understand it, a critical part of Marxist ideology, is that the state does have to set itself up as being supreme. The collective, ultimately, would then take over on behalf of the state and, democratize itself. And then you just have a basic tyranny of the majority by whatever political means they end up coming up with, where they can do whatever they want to the 49%. There's no checks and balances whatsoever, and they collectively control the means of production. So basically, it doesn't eliminate the state. It just makes the state larger, significantly larger. That's my issue with communists, in fact, and why I would say they're not true anarchists. Although I don't say anyone isn't a true anarchist. in day-to-day life or on Facebook or whatever. Well, not Facebook, but I generally don't say that because it basically is a hurling match between anarcho-capitalists and anarcho-communists, with each side pointing to the other saying, you're not a real anarchist. So anyway, the author's mother and grandfather, the mother's grandfather and uncle were killed during the Cultural Revolution for the crime of being privileged landlords. Which is interesting because there are people on Twitter who joke about eating the rich.
Yeah.
Red Guard thugs beat them to death with shovels and dumped their bodies in a nearby river. A favorite disposal site that was used so frequently that the waters flowed red with blood. Such ghastly accounts were common during that era. Communism produced destruction and death on an unprecedented scale in the world's oldest civilization. Again, I would dispute the characterization of that as communism, but whatever. So the Red Guards destroyed more Chinese treasures and artifacts in 1 decade than the European imperialists and Japanese invaders combined. Millions perished. Tens of millions more were persecuted, exiled, imprisoned, beaten, or tortured, often in horrifically creative and sadistic ways. It was only after Mao's death, once the chaos from the Cultural Revolution had subsided, that Deng Xiaoping's reforms gradually, and still incompletely, opened up one of the most repressive regimes of the 20th century. Now, China is still extremely repressive.
Oh, yeah.
So I can only imagine what it was actually like under Mao. But there are people today who call themselves Maoists and support Mao's particular interpretation of communism or socialism or whatever, or his implementation attempt, rather, here in the United States.
I don't see why, because we all see what this leads to. I mean, you have to be willingly not looking to not see what this leads to.
Well, I mean, in theory, they don't have an issue with what's happening in China.
That's even more scary.
Well, yeah, but there are idiots. There are a lot of idiots out there, and who, when they see things like this, they go, "Oh, but everything is fair." And I know the poor Muslims are being rounded up and thrown into concentration camps and re-educated, but
no, they don't. That's just propaganda.
Yeah, that's fake news. I mean, there are even people on the left right now, today, arguing that gulags were compassionate.
The Soviet gulags.
The Soviet gulags were compassionate.
Nice places.
And they mean this. They're not saying this ironically. They're not saying this to poke fun at stupid leftists. They genuinely believe that these, because they gave people jobs, and that was productive. That seems to be the main bullet point they have in their little presentation about why gulags are totally not inhumane practices, which, like all prisons, they absolutely are.
You know, at this point, the far left has gone so far off the rails that I literally think of them as political flat earthers.
Yeah, I mean, that's not an incorrect assessment. I mean, but I don't know how widespread this belief that gulags are compassionate really is among the left. I like to think that it's just some fringe lunatic on Twitter who said something so stupid that she was actually, it seemed like she was chair of some LGBT group on some college campus, and they actually removed her for saying it.
That might have happened.
We covered it here on the show, but it was back when Will was still here, so it was a while ago.
I remember the story. I don't remember what the resolution was.
Well, there was no resolution. It's just some stupid idiot saying some stupid idiotic thing, I would say.
But people are taking it seriously.
Well, yeah, and so did the person who said it. I mean, there are people out there who believe for whatever stupid reason. I mean, you have people out there who believe that the concentration camps, that the death camps, that Auschwitz was compassionate. Well, I mean, some of them say that it existed, but it was a good thing. It was compassionate toward not necessarily toward the Jews, but it was compassionate toward this collective called humanity that they think was somehow made better because of it.
My.
Yeah, people, once they get caught up in this collectivist mindset where it's okay to burn a few stamps in order to make the stamp collection more aesthetically pleasing to however the particular beholder wishes to see it, then all bets are off. Why not burn 99% of the stamps and leave just the ones that you personally love the most. That's collectivism in a nutshell. And it doesn't really matter to me if they're talking about exterminating all the trans people or exterminating all the black people or exterminating all the Jews or exterminating all the rich people. To me, you're just an insane collectivist who wants to use mass murder to impose your ideology onto the rest of the world, and I oppose that.
Well, someone out there wants to exterminate 90% of the population. They put up a monument in Georgia about it.
That is not what the Georgia Guidestones are. It is not about exterminating the population.
Oh, I'm pretty sure that whoever put that up had something like that in mind.
It mentions, the line is something along the lines of, the human population should not exceed 500 million.
In balance with nature.
Yeah, but that's a far cry from it. In truth, the human population probably should not be as high as it is. But that's not a statement saying I want to kill most of the world's population.
People are taking it that way.
Yeah, but how somebody interprets a statement isn't necessarily valid. I said that I will gladly defend the right of people to have consensual sex with dogs, and people interpreted that to mean that I have sex with dogs. Their interpretation, just because they interpret it that way, isn't necessarily correct. Oh. It's just how they interpreted what I said. And so when you have somebody saying, well, the population of humans should probably be in perpetual balance with nature, somewhere around 500 million, you're going to get people saying, oh, they're calling for genocide of every number over that. And they weren't necessarily. If they were, it seems like they probably could have had the financial resources to do it. Yes.
We still don't know who financed.
No, and we never will, I don't think. The whole thing was really fascinating as far as the financing of it goes, because they weren't going to do it, but then the guy walked in there with a suitcase full of cash or something like that. I don't remember now. But this is the Call to Freedom. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. This is the Call to Freedom, and maybe you regularly listen to the show and have been wondering how you can help and show your support. Well, social media shares go a long way, but so does cash, and you can do that by using Patreon at patreon.com/call-to-freedom. Our wonderful patrons there are currently helping to keep the show up and running, including the podcast at calltofreedomlive.podbean.com, and we can't thank them enough for showing their support. Once more, that's patreon.com/call-to-freedom if you would like to check it out. And we've been talking about socialism pretty extensively and the many, many failures of socialism, which is not surprising to anyone who has watched it happen, as can be found all over the place from the Soviet Union. It seems like China is probably the only place where it hasn't happened yet, or North Korea. And North Korea is really only sustained because the Chinese keep pouring money into it.
The Chinese actually started moving away from socialist economics, though.
Not on the world scale. Not internally.
Only on internally. The world. They don't have state-owned. They have state-controlled enterprises, but they're not directly owned by the state.
Okay, so they're becoming more fascist.
They're becoming more fascist,
like the United States, then. Well, that's not much of an improvement.
No, they're not having millions of people die anymore. It's less. It's more like thousands. But so it's an improvement,
I guess. So the resurgence of socialism in the adopted country of all of these people who have fled the horrors of socialism, but who, interestingly enough, have not fled the horrors of the free market, has spurred many to speak out. And this gives them hope that as an American citizen concerned about the future of the economy, future of the currency, someone has asked, in what way is the USA fascist? Well, we spent like an hour going over this. You'll have to rewind.
Pick up the podcast tomorrow.
Yeah, or you can replay the video and listen to it. We outlined pretty clearly what definition of fascism we were using and demonstrated pretty clearly how the U.S. falls underneath that umbrella. So as the United States becomes more diverse, I just triggered all the people on the right. and technology makes it easier to make connections, it is time for us to reach out to socially conscious peers committed to making the world a better place. Young people concerned about minorities and marginalized groups should be especially aware of the dangers of concentrating coercive power, especially under democratic control.
Indeed.
He writes, even under democratic control, I would point out especially under democratic control. We know exactly what fascism is, in fact, and we use, I'm pretty sure. Actually, no one really agrees on what fascism is, I would point out. Mussolini, the inventor of fascism, characterized it perhaps most clearly as everything under the state, everything in the state, nothing beyond the state, which we do have here in the United States with a supreme state. But, that's really not that distinct from just statism in general. So I don't think that the definition of fascism is actually going to be valid for any particular discussion.
Yeah, the word might actually be pretty close to lost at this point.
Yeah, I would argue that it's probably always been that way. It is a corporatized system as far as most people would agree, I believe. But the state is the puppeteer of the corporate or of the corporations rather than owning them directly. It allows them to be quote unquote privately owned, and it just pulls the strings from behind the curtains. That would be the characterization of fascism. And of course, it was also present during Nazi Germany extensively, where, you had the company that made Zyklon B that was technically a private company, but if the Nazi regime wanted a thing from them, they also weren't really able to say no, were they?
Not really.
And that's sort of what you have here in the United States, where if the government was to tell Lockheed Martin, hey, we want to buy these things from you, and Lockheed Martin says, no, you're going to drop these bombs on, brown kids in the Middle East, and we don't really support that.
Lockheed Martin does support that. They love it when you drop bombs on kids in the Middle East. That's
why I prefaced it with if, in order to make my point. The United States would make them because we want those bombs. So that's... Yes, that's exactly how I just described fascism, as a filter to ensure businesses work toward the advancement of the nation and its people. I'm almost, that assumes a lot of benevolence on behalf of the government. They're trying to ensure the advancement of themselves and their own wallets, certainly.
States do one thing and one thing only. They ensure their own power.
Yeah.
That's the top priority for a state.
Yeah, because the same survival rules, the same evolutionary rules apply to the state as they do any other organism. And that is that an organism above all else seeks to preserve itself. And that is similarly true when we look at the state. So young people concerned about minorities and marginalized groups should be especially wary of democratic control, because minorities and marginalized groups historically have not done well under democracy, as you can see from the Uyghur population in China.
Yeah, pure democracy is just the majority running roughshod over any minority.
Yeah, and that's essentially what communism would be. And all of this is highlighted by the timeless problem, the tyranny of the majority. It's the reason why we in the United States are not a democracy and are instead a democratic republic. In the United States, political questions cannot be taken up in so general and absolute a manner, and all parties are willing to recognize the rights of the majority because they all hope at some time to be able to exercise them to their own advantage. The majority in that country, therefore, exercise a prodigious actual authority and a power of opinion which is nearly as great. It's like he just found some exciting, smart-sounding excerpt and slapped it in the middle of his article. Because it's not really related to anything we were discussing, because the United States is not a democracy. Now, it's true that in theory, the majority of the population is able to implement some control over the direction the government goes, but the popular vote, which again is fictitious, it's just a compilation of the votes of the 50 states. But if we assume for a moment that the popular vote is a valid expression of the will of the American people, then the popular vote is the only thing that should matter. And it's clearly the case in the United States that whoever wins the popular vote does not necessarily become president, because Trump did not win the popular vote.
Yep, and there he is.
And neither did Bush. I don't believe.
Yeah,
Bush Jr.
Bush versus Gore, 2000.
Yeah.
They took that to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, they did. And it dragged on forever. Although he was cautiously optimistic about the American experiment, Tocqueville could not see any legal guarantee or barrier to check the tyranny of the majority, but the circumstances and the manners of the country. Well, that's sort of true. There was, and he's not wrong, actually, to get down to it, because there was the Bill of Rights, which ideally was going to protect the minority from the majority, but that only matters if the majority is actually willing to stick to them. And that they don't just say, hey, you know what, let's scrap this thing about free religious belief and instead say free Christian belief.
Yeah, or let's get our Supreme Court justices to make up some kind of mysterious exception that so we can say it doesn't apply when it plainly obviously does. But since the court says it doesn't, there you go.
Yeah, that's absolutely what the legal system is best at, for sure. Because Roe versus Wade, and I would have to confirm this again with Tom Gray, who I'm going to go ahead and say is no longer with the show. He's an evangelical Christian from East Tennessee who was with the show daily for a very long time. I think he characterized Roe versus Wade as actually being about intellectual property. And it somehow ended up becoming a pro-abortion case. So
how did that happen?
Whatever it was, whether it was intellectual property or something else equally stupid, and I'm almost positive it was intellectual property, the Supreme Court is notorious. They are very good at taking a thing and presenting it as anything other than that thing in order to make sure that it falls under some other umbrella of laws and generate this 2,500-page legal shenanigan document about how they're totally justified in doing this. And you just kind of have to believe them or nod your head. Just tune it out and go, okay, yeah, sure, whatever, man. That's what you people do. You're lawyers, you write the rules, you enforce the rules. Actually, you hire thugs to enforce the rules, but the rules are written by lawyers for lawyers so that they can argue with each other and, exploit us without making it too obvious that they're exploiting us. That's the American government, not a democracy. It's ruled by attorneys. I'm going to say that definitively. This is the Call to Freedom. Don't go anywhere. Free Talk Live is coming up next.